There were 19 candles on my cake. The name written on the frosting wasn't mine. I noticed it right away, but I didn't say a word. In our house, silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a form of survival. That evening, my brother got the keys to a brand new SUV. I got a lecture about duty. It lasted 22 minutes. I timed it. I smiled the entire time because in our family, a smile meant agreement, and disagreement meant consequences. By morning, I had packed my backpack. A hoodie, $58, an old phone with no internet, and a one-way ticket. I didn't leave a note. I just disappeared. 10 days later, my father called. He was crying. Please, just come back. I listened in silence, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing at all. It took me 8 years to understand what those tears actually meant. And when I finally understood, I came back, with a folder on the passenger seat. My name is Liana. I am 32 years old. I work as a night shift accountant in Cleveland. And if you have ever done everything right, only to remain completely invisible, then you will understand this story. It all started in a small town called Ridgewood. Population, just over 3,000. One supermarket, 2 churches, and one place where our family's destiny was decided. The store, Harrison & Sons Supplies. Founded in 1962. Pay attention to the word son, not family. Not children. Not heirs. Son, singular. And the entire town accepted it as a law of nature. My grandfather owned that store. Then, my father, and then, as everyone was certain, my younger brother. Even before he learned how to read. And me, I was just helping out, for free, every summer, every weekend. I knew the warehouse better than my own bedroom. I kept the inventory, took deliveries, counted the daily revenue. I knew the business. But the business didn't know me. When I was 11, I asked, "Dad, can I try working at the register?" He didn't even look up. "You're already busy." My brother was sitting on the counter at that moment, eating ice cream. "He's learning," my father added. My mother handled the store's bookkeeping for 30 years without a salary. She called it supporting the family. I would later call it something else. None of it was loud. Nobody screamed, nobody raised a hand. I was just slowly being erased. From decisions. From conversations. From the future. On that birthday when I turned 19, everything became undeniably clear. The name on the cake was my brother's name. "It's just a mistake," my mother said. But he blew out the candles, and that was when I left. The years passed quickly. First, working as a waitress, then college at night, then my first stable job. I learned how to count. Not just money. Facts. Discrepancies. Histories. And one day, while going through the archives of an old business for a client, I saw a familiar last name. Harrison. My grandfather. But the documents were strange. Very strange. I started digging. At night. For weeks. For months. And I found something no one was ever supposed to see. The store had never belonged solely to the men. It was registered to a woman, my great-grandmother. But her name had disappeared. From the records. From the sign. From history. Legally, the business should have passed through a different line. Not to my brother. To me. All that time, they hadn't just been ignoring me. They were bypassing me. And then I finally understood why my father had cried. He knew. I returned to Ridgewood 8 years later. Nothing had changed. The same smell of timber, the same shelves, the same looks. My father had aged. My brother was standing behind the register. On his finger gleamed the owner's ring. "You came back," he said. I nodded, and laid the folder on the counter. Inside were documents, signatures, history, the truth. We talked for a long time, but for the first time, honestly, without smiles. My father confessed it was just easier to leave things as they were. Easier. A powerful word. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply said, from now on, things will be different. And for the first time in my entire life, I was heard. The story didn't end with a victory. It ended with balance. The store stayed in the family. But now, with the right name, the new sign reads Harrison Family Supplies. No son. No exceptions. Sometimes change doesn't begin with loud words. It begins when someone stops staying silent. The first few weeks after my return were strange. Nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. Yet tension filled everything. In the way my father set his cup on the table, the way my brother closed out the register, the way my mother flipped through old notebooks. We started with the basics, with numbers. I brought printouts, reconciliations, old tax reports, copies of registrations. "Let's start with what we actually have," I said. This was my territory. Numbers don't interrupt. Numbers don't pretend. Numbers don't lie unless they are forced to. My father nodded. For the first time, without hesitation. We uncovered a lot. More than anyone expected. Debts that no one remembered. Suppliers who had long changed their terms, though it was never reflected in the paperwork. Cash transactions that never made it into official reporting. It wasn't fraud. It was a habit. As old as the store itself. We've always worked this way, my father said. I looked at him. Which is precisely why we won't be working this way anymore. At first, my brother stayed out of it. He would come in, open the store, make sales, leave. Minimum words, maximum distance, but one evening he stayed behind. Do you really think you can change everything? He asked. There was no mockery, just directness. I didn't answer right away, because that wasn't a question about the business. It was a question about us. I think, I said, that we've already seen worse. He let out a short smirk, brief, and for the first time he sat down beside me. We began dividing responsibilities, not out of habit, by function. Him, procurement and suppliers. Me, finances and accounting. Mom, documentation and archives. Dad was learning to let go. That was the hardest part for him. One evening, he lingered after closing. We were left alone. I truly thought it would be better this way, he said, not looking at me. For whom? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. For the system. I nodded. And I was outside the system. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, I didn't see a store owner. I saw a man who, for many years, chose simplicity over fairness. 3 months later, we switched suppliers. 6 months later, we paid off the old debts. 9 months later, we turned a profit officially for the first time. Not in word, on paper, with signatures, with reports, with a future. But the real changes weren't happening in the figures. They were in the little things. My father started asking for my opinion, not out of formality, genuinely. My mother said one day, I want a salary, and nobody laughed. My brother stopped introducing himself as the owner. He would say, we run the store. We. But the past doesn't simply disappear. It returns. Always. One day, a man walked into the store. I recognized him instantly. Small town. Faces aren't forgotten. Mr. Collins, the lawyer. He used to handle my grandfather's affairs and then my father's. Glad to see that everything has stabilized, he said, looking around. I didn't smile. We're working on it, he nodded, and looked at the new sign through the window. An interesting choice for a name. A more accurate one, I replied. He paused. Not all changes are for the better. I held his gaze. The ones built on the truth are. After he left, my father stayed silent for a long time. Then he said, he helped us save the business. I answered, he helped you save a version of history. It was important to know the difference. That evening, I opened the folder again. That exact one, the one I had brought back with me. I flipped through the pages, signatures, dates, facts, and at the end, my great-grandmother's name. Clear, without distortion. I ran my finger over the line, and for the first time I felt no anger, just closure. A year passed. The store changed. Not much on the outside, the same shelves, the same goods, but the atmosphere was different. People feel that, even if they can't explain it. One day, a 12-year-old girl was standing by the register. She watched as I counted her change. Do you work here? She asked. Yes. Is this your store? I looked at her and answered, yes, it's ours. She nodded, as if that was completely normal, as if that was how it was supposed to be. And there was more meaning in that than in all the legal documents. Sometimes I think about that 19-year-old version of myself, about the girl with a backpack, $58 and a one-way ticket. She didn't know how it would end. She just knew that staying meant disappearing. And she chose risk over silence. Now I know, the hardest part isn't leaving. The hardest part is coming back and staying. Not in the role you were assigned, but in the one you choose for yourself. Sometimes my father still looks at the old sign which we took down and left in the back room. Harrison and Son. He doesn't throw it away. And I don't ask him to, because that too is part of history, just no longer the only part. If you have ever felt like you were being quietly, without noise, erased from your own life, know this. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just the absence of a voice. And everything changes the moment you decide to speak up.